Oh, the expectation. Okay. I'll we'll we'll I'll send it to Christina. She'll print it out. Já pode? So, hello everyone. Good afternoon. What a week. Well, school leadership and inclusion. This is our webinar for today. We'll give a brief introduction. Then we'll look at key concepts of what is. We'll tackle a bit on the emerging actions in dimensions for leadership and practices, and then we'll do some final remarks. So, unfortunately, even in 2015, these are the numbers of, well, youngsters that didn't finish their high school in Europe 28. So, as average, we have more than 10%. 10% of the population in Europe between 18 and 24, between 18 years old and 24 years old, are not with their high school finished. And the problem is even worse in Southern Europe, as you can see for the figures. So this is actually a huge problem in Europe, and it has to be tackled, and the project that we're in is one way of Europe facing it and tackling it. So, but these numbers are just the visible part of the iceberg. It's the numbers that show. They don't show us the problem. It's just what we can see. The problem comes before. The problem comes from school. And one of the main problems here is that people look at these cases as inevitable. So that there's nothing to do. There will be always students that don't cope with learning situations. There will be always students that don't like school. And this type of mind frame is one of the big issues. And that's something that we need to change. And in fact, some go further than this statement and actually ask, what can we do? What can the school do? What can be done better? How can we prevent this failure? And to pursue this last meaning, what can we do better? We need to look at the school as a whole. We need an approach to school, because school is not a building. School is made of people, and people interact. So many people look at the school like it's the building they go to study. But no. School interacts with everyone. School interacts with the community. School interacts with the government. We'll look at that afterwards. So, in this webinar here, we intend to look at the role of leadership. How can leadership act on this problem? How can leadership promote inclusion in school? Because that's one of the important things to prevent the dropout that we've been facing in Europe. So, like I told you, speaking of early school dropout means, of course, speaking of inclusion. And when we speak of inclusion, it comes always the discussion of different and normal. And the mindset for normal in education is the student that is learning path, just straightforward, in the correct way, and becomes a university professor, because we train them for that. School is ready to train them for that. And any student that doesn't follow that path will be considered different. And that difference may lead to exclusion. And when a student is excluded, is lonely, he gets frustrated, and that's the path, the direct path of getting out of school. He might not get out of school immediately, because in Europe you are forced to be in school until a certain age, but in his mind, he's already out. So, in recent years, it was reinforced that students have a right to be included in regular classes. And it was also reinforced that the school has a duty to educate all students. It doesn't matter the conditions. And this is a very important dimension in education, because it brings to light equity. So school has to ensure that doesn't matter the personal circumstances, doesn't matter the social circumstances, they are entitled to education. That cannot be used as an excuse. Oh, it comes from a bad social background. That's not an excuse. School has to deal with it. Okay? So this meant that the minimum standards for education for all are set, and we all must oblige to them. And as you can see from this figure, so that's the exclusion. We moved on to segregation. So there was a school and there was special schools for the ones that were different. And then there was this, what we call integration. There is no more than segregation in a classroom. So they are there, but on their group. So the aim, the real aim, what we need is the last one, inclusion. They are all in a classroom, and they are all entitled to the same conditions. So, but now the problem is that, well, let's go back. All of us look at this inclusion and say, yeah, this is the one. The problem is this is highly accepted in theory, but in practice, it's hard. It's really hard to do it. And for this to work, there must be a stable framework for schools. Both in policy, education policies, and both in educational project for school. Because otherwise, you'll have teachers living great discomfort trying to get to that inclusion, but not having the support of the framework that they need, not having the support of the entire school. So they'll be working alone, and they will be discouraged professionally for that. But trying to get to this inclusion has left schools struggling, and now the big question is, it has huge implications on the daily lives of schools, and have they succeeded? We know some did and some not. We're lacking uniformity on that subject. And once again, school is kind of a living organism. It's not a building. Every classroom has its dimension, and they are inserted on the pedagogical dimension of the school itself that is supported by the organizational dimension. And the school interacts with the community, interacts with parents, and also interacts with the laws that come from the central administration and also with the local administration. So the institution itself is full of personal relations, which means that every school, it's a school. So it's hard to pinpoint a solution for all. And here, school leadership has definitely an effect, but what does it mean? Well, leadership is a form of power, kind of power. It can be exercised on others, so that's the meaning of leader. But what we know about leadership, if we consider the framework on leadership, if we consider the skills and competences an individual leader needs, then we know a lot. There's been years and years of study on the subject. But if you consider what it means to be a school leader, the actions that are needed in practice to be committed to students, to be committed to the learning, to be committed to inclusion in school, then there are not enough studies, definitely. We're lacking there. And a leadership needs to grasp these three dimensions. He needs a vision, and he needs to share that vision. He needs to grasp the context where he is, and he needs to promote an agency so everyone shares that vision. So the practice of leadership is actually shared with the school, not with himself only. Because a standalone leader will not manage to do much. So, what can, in a vision, where is the focus? The focus has to be the student. In the vision of school for inclusion, the focus has to be the student. And one thing that we have to ask ourselves is, in order to ensure access to all students, to have education for all, is how can we deal with different expectations? Because students are not just one, there are multitude. So they'll be having different expectations. And we need them to participate in school. We need them to be there. And how can we do that? What roles can we devise for students? What rules, what rights, what duties, what responsibilities? And here the word responsibility is very important. Because everyone needs this responsibility. It has to be shared with the whole community, not only by teachers, not only by staff, but also by the students. That's a way of including them. And of course, the learning conditions must be assured. So support material has to be there. And in that, what is the role of teaching teams? There has to be multiple teams to ensure that we can differentiate the learning path. Because otherwise, we'll keep on the route for exclusion. So, at the macro level, the context, the leader has to understand and have a broader view of the pressures, of the external pressures that the school suffers. So you'll have parents putting pressure on the school to act in a certain way. You'll have central administration and local administration intervening, giving some new exam to do. So, and this context has to be grasped and has to be dealt with in order not to be a force toward the exclusion, and in fact to be a force towards inclusion. So a leader has to be aware of this context and lead with it. And of course, at a micro level, inside the school itself. So we need to understand the nature of the student body you have. Where do they come from? What are their social conditions? What are their economical conditions? What is their educational background, if it's not the first school they've come to? And it's important to understand and accommodate the school organizations and practices, because if a change is needed, a leader will have to balance between the need there is for change in order to get inclusion, but the need that comes from the teachers that will look sometimes to intrusive measures as something that has to be fought and not shared with. And here I would say the hard part, the agency. So making the change, going to the vision that we have, the centerpiece of action in school. So make it in a way that it's shared by staff, teachers, students, and community. So, and this is the hardest part. I would say it's easy to have a vision, relatively easy to grasp the context, promoting that the change of life is the center of the institution. That's the hard part. So, and this cannot be done by a person alone, so it has to be a shared responsibility. Shared responsibility by, once again, all the staff and the community itself. Because a leader the influence that the leader has on the student learning is only possible indirectly. He cannot go to the classroom and teach the student. So, the leadership on the school has a strong influence in the working conditions, very strong, determines most of everything, has a very moderate influence on the motivation and commitment of students, and has a low capacity on the learning, because that's the work of the teachers themselves. So, once again, the great word and the great point here, sharing. So it has to be shared. The vision that has to be shared. It's a work that has to be shared. And to tell us about those huge difficulties,
okay, I can do. Continues. Okay, like Miguel said about these leadership tasks we have to do for the inclusion, we might consider that one of the strategies that we have to address is the distributed leadership in school. But I wonder, that is the easier task? No, of course not. This is a hard task, a difficult task. So, sometimes there is difficulties in implementing the shared leadership. Why? Because you have to get the commitment of the teachers to the project of the school, to the tasks you have to address, you have to do. And then, at least in Portugal, we have this central placement of teachers. And so often they came to a school without knowing the school, without not knowing the educational project, and maybe they can't be identified with the project. So that can be a difficulty. The other problem is the boundaries between the individual freedom of the teaching and the authority of the director, the principal. You have to balance those things very well. These three difficulties that I gave you to example needed that the principal, the head of the school, must solve these problems. And why? In what way he can do it? Well, he must be the one who try to conquer all the teachers. And I'm speaking only on the teachers because they are the ones who won't address, put on for the people this task of implementing the educational project. So he has to conquer them, and that is a difficult task. That's why this influential that the principal has on organize the things, it's very important, because in that way, he can organize things and make the influence indirect to the teachers and to the students and the educational process. So that the secret, it's not really the secret, is to involve everyone on the project. No one can lead alone. No one can make the leadership way alone. Otherwise, he'll go in his way, and when he look backwards, he's alone. So that is the main thing, as I understand, on the leadership in school. That is the first principle. Later on, I'll speak to the other things. Yeah.
Once again, sorry, I was out of voice. So, building a framework for the leadership. The development of a project to build a school for all requires new skills, resources, and support to this process. And the leadership is a structure that is essential for the support. And the studies of the few studies that exist on the practice of leadership in schools work towards an inclusive school. I'll highlight that there is the need for these four aspects to be worked. So there's the need of setting direction, there's the need of the professional development of the teachers, there will be a need of redesigning the organization, because typically the organization is ready for inclusion, and of course there will be a very big need of monitoring practices of teaching and learning, because it's going to be everything new if you want an inclusive school. And so setting the direction, that means that the inclusion will be an objective in a comprehensive way, not only to a specific group, not only to a specific group of students, but for all. So the inclusion must be for all students. We cannot look at inclusion thinking about the different. We have to think about the different and the normal, and that's the inclusion, because they're going to be one body in the end. So there's going to be a need of a consensus between all. That means that the school and the practice of students will have to be changed. And we need to identify possible ways to achieve it. Goals have to be defined. A path has to be defined. All that has to be negotiated. And very important, the expectations have to be high. You have to aim high, because otherwise it won't work. So, once again, this project, this educational project, has to be shared by all teachers, by the community, and has to be built around the word inclusion. And in order to do that, a leader has to assure the professional development for change. So he has to empower the teachers that he has in the school. So there has to be the sharing of the leadership. Accountability must be negotiated. Collaborative work must be set. The monitoring of the pedagogical work of the teacher has to be arranged, since we'll be working on inclusion. And in the end, or not in the end because this is a circle, the learning has to be assessed. So, are we fulfilling the objectives? Are we actually including students?
These issues here put it on the practical way, what we found in schools. I would say that when we speak about negotiated accountability, we mean that it's assigning coordinating educational process in schools, like giving the teachers, some teachers on school, these parts, these responsibilities. And then we have to look for the teachers who are better training and with better skills for do this coordinating work on all the teachers, on the departments, on the groups, disciplinary groups, and so on and so on. Other things we must do is about in the collaborative work, which it means that in school it's working by preparation of the annual plan. We have this plan of activities during the year, so that plan must be constructed by all the teachers. So must be borne by a collaborative work, because if it's made like that, everything will take part, will believe in that, because it's something they own produced. That's very important to do. For example, we've been speaking this all week about one best practice called Class Plus. That's one was the example that we have a collaborative work on preparation, on setting all the pedagogical strategies to deliver that strategy. Another thing is the assessment of learning. In that case, we tend to look to find the criteria and form products to assess homogeneous evaluation or assessment. Other thing, as Miguel said, was the monitoring of pedagogical work of teachers. That is the very important task doing on the schools. In Portugal, we are nearly started to do this work, because it's very important that the teacher never be alone. Must have supervision, pedagogical supervision among the peers in the classroom. That's because otherwise, if we don't have this work, we going to take risks to doing something not better, not the good way. So it's important to have this peer supervision. I think it's very important to the work we must do in schools. Continue.
So another important part of the leadership work in order to get an inclusive school will be the redesign of the organization. And in order to have an inclusive school, there has to be support to inclusion. And that means different pedagogical responses to different students. And that will also mean alternative organization models, not just one, but more than one, if necessary. And for that, as Faisal said before, we need to develop a culture of collaborative work. Because it's going to be, once again, like I said before, impossible for a teacher to do it by himself. He will need all the structure behind him. So there has to be collaboration. And there will be a more powerful work if there's planning and coordination among teachers. And for that, the role of teaching teams has to be strengthened in the organization. So the leader has to uphold that the teaching teams are a force in school and not teachers by themselves. And of course, the focus has to be kept in the quality. What we need is education students. So we need to train them and teach them in order to be citizens of our countries, of Europe. And for that, school, once again, has a very important part in what is called inclusion.
Some few examples that why we can, how we can do some practice for inclusion in school. For instance, in Portugal we have this figure that's named class director. It's the teacher who is coordinating the team of teachers of each class. And he has this role, this responsibility to coordinating all the teachers, but also monitoring directly the class, the students, they path along the year. Other strategy is tutoring, individualized follow-up students. We must have this kind of strategy. For instance, in Portugal, we have this strategy on schools. We take one or two teachers who follow up the several students who needed more support by the teachers. Another two examples is this alternative curricular paths that we can put the students who have some difficulties to do the regular ways on their path on school. Other example, as we saw this morning in schools we visit, is the educational and training courses. It's another way of addressing motivation and put on the track again the students on school. This is some examples of inclusion that we can put on our schools for getting better results and decrease the early school leaving. That's our issue here in the seminar.
So, for monitoring the learning process, the teaching, a scheme very similar to this one has to be put together. So there will be the need of a system of rules based in values. So in order to get a positive social interaction, and that's a way to have a safe and a learning environment in school. Because if you have social problems inside the school, the learning environment won't be safe, and it won't be a good environment to learn. And that will, of course, bring forward high expectations on the learning process, on the education. And that's the aim that we need. And in order to know that we're on the right track, there has to be an assessment for the learning, because there's the need of data to make decisions. A leader can only make decisions with the data. Without information, you won't know which direction to turn to. And with that, having the assessment for learning, you can then realize if there is the need of new systems to support the teaching and learning, or the learning difficulties, or if you need to redesign some of them. And this will force you, a leader, to take into account the difficulties of teachers and then put forward support for them. And with that, making the whole project supported by all the community. So, final remarks. Definitely, the directors of the schools are key elements on making schools places where you do not give up. This is very important, because we shouldn't allow a student to give up. We should have always an answer for the student. And often, there's the need to make difficult decisions at various levels: management, families, teachers, students, staff. Definitely, there's no magic formula. There's not a formula that will work for all. Every school is a school. Like I said before, it's not walls, it's a micro-social system. And therefore, every school will be a school. And therefore, also, we need a whole school approach. We cannot look at the school just in a certain point or in a certain department. And definitely, it's not the leaders alone that have to do this work. It has to be a collective work. It has to be shared with the community. I think that's the big message here, that this inclusion needs to be shared. And finally, I would like to thank you and and thank our team that has been working with us, Professor Cristina Gomes da Silva, Professor Ana Costa, Professor Jorge Pinto, and Faisal as a couple ones on his school that he needs to thank.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? Oh.
Sure.
Okay.
Hello. It's a nice presentation. Phil put an interesting question, in my opinion, is what when the teachers how are the strategies for helping weaker teachers to improve when they have been identified?
Well, I can answer that saying it all depends on the leadership on school, because a school with a good leadership, the leader, the principal, have this in account. I cannot leave anybody behind. So I have to look to all of my staff and see what is the difficulties he has, so that I can help. And then I should draw this system of helping. it's not, I should say, it's not a very, any wonderful formula. It means that if I have this organization on my department, with the head of department, and with the collaborative work, between the process, what in time of each teacher has difficulty, will ask for the others, will ask help for the others. And the collaborative work will address that answers that he needs. If in the process some teachers has more difficulties and it's not enough this collaborative work for help, then I must address other strategies. For instance, organize training, complementary training actions for that he can get answers for the problems. The other strategy, for instance, that we use on the schools is that have a quite very important diagnosis of all our teachers. A principal must know his body of teachers and the weakness and the strong points. So when he knows about the potential of each teacher, he can distribute the tasks, the work, in considering that. Earlier, I speak about distributed leadership. We can speak about distributed work. That is very important. I cannot be blind when I'm a leader, distributed all, because the work is not the same. The students are not the same. The context is not the same. As I said before, we get the teachers without knowing them and with anticipation. So we have to study them, see what they are the potential, what they are the weakness, and then make the distribution of the work consider that. And the other part is organize collaborative work and training process for the teachers can't be able to go ahead on their work. I don't know if I answered well the question.
Well, I'm impressed. There's lots of things to think about. I have two questions because I would like to know what to you is a good school leader. Well, not a complete profile, but I would like to hear from you something more about that. What kind of person is that, with what kind of qualities, or the school leaders? And the second is, I'm a firm believer in leading by example. You ask of teachers to take into account the differences between students. For Faisal, that means 100% inclusion. Wow, Faisal, that's a lot. But it's a nice thought that you want to take everybody along until their exam or the finish of their studies. When a teacher has to take into account differences between students, what does that mean for school leaders and their teachers, the people they lead? I would like to know something more about that.
Okay, so going for 100% inclusion will the school, there will be stresses in school, definitely, because there will be the need of alternative paths, there will be the need of reorganization, and human society is not keen on change. And that since a school is a society on itself, it won't be keen on change. So first of all and foremost, the leader has to convince the teachers that to share their vision, share the vision with the teachers, to bring them in to the vision. That's the most important part. And, yes.
I'm glad you used the word convincing, because sometimes it shows, you use the word difficulties, conquering, that supposes that you think it is going to be very hard to bring about these changes. So when you change the word to convincing, that's a good change, I think. But please continue.
So, well, once again, the leader has to convince its teachers to share the vision, because it has to share the responsibility. The responsibility of the inclusion has to be shared with all. So if you force it against the will of the teacher, then it won't work. We have huge amount of examples of a leader that forced something to move. Well, sometimes it works. Sometimes by example, it works. Sometimes the leader is so strong that he forced in such a way that then results start to show up, and then the other teachers finally came into that vision. But that's, I would say that's a disruptive strategy. Not the best, definitely. It might be a way of you getting a fragmented school and losing a safe environment for learning. So in order to be on the right path, you need to share the responsibility, to have everyone keen on the vision that you want to implement. Well, then it's part of the work to convince, to have dialogue, to show, to even implement training actions, prepare visits to other schools that might have a working program, so the teachers can see in the field that it actually works.
I think we sort of have a blueprint of a good school leader by now. Thank you.
Yeah. We visited a school, the Portuguese school this morning. And one of the headmasters told us that they couldn't take too much risk because they should be punished after that. What do you think of the risk that school leaders can take? How do you think about that, Miguel?
I'm a bit out of focus because I wasn't in the visit.
I can say something about that. When she said she couldn't take some risks, it's about the lack of lower autonomy that the school leaders has in this moment.
Okay.
But I think going back about the vision part, if a leader has ideas, has a vision, he can't. The autonomy is not very big in this moment, but there is a space to do things different, to do things that can't give answers, can't address the problems of the school. That's why we have thousands of schools, and we have schools that go very well, other schools don't go so well. I think, in my opinion, the leader of the schools, or the leaders, because if we only focus on the principal, the head, we don't go far. Because no one does nothing alone. The secret is being the leader, have the vision, and then distribute the leadership to the others, to the several levels, so that the whole process is on the group. That's very important. The principal this morning said that, for instance, if I want to do a different project which includes some financial risks, I have to take care because there are rules that I cannot pass through. That's why she said. But in our indoors, I have some autonomy today. The head of the schools have some autonomy to organize, to keep up new solutions for their problem. But then again, the principle, the most important thing is to have a vision and ideas. Otherwise, I'm only be a leader of administration. In school today, we have this management part, we have this pedagogical leadership, and we have this financial management. In Portugal, the head is responsible for these three parts, is the most responsible for these three parts. Okay? We don't have a different pedagogical leader, because the principal is also the pedagogical leader. So he has to see the big picture, distribute the leadership, enforce those leaders for put on the field the vision, the project that is designed for the school.
But if I may add a thing to this part of the discussion, as it's true there's not much autonomy in school, there are some, and with that some, wonderful things can be done. We have an example of a school in the center part of the country that is inserted inside the science center, and they are working right now just on project-based learning. So they are not following the regular path of all schools, that is following the official manual. They are doing that. So that means, and they're public schools, that means there's room to make change. It's not much, true, there is.
Okay, another question. How do you say the place of the change, the place of the change of the life of students is the center. And in what manner can you involve to family or community? Maybe what activities for make with the families or the community?
Well, that's a very good question, a very hard one, because it depends on the context. Really depends on the community that the school is inserted on. So, like we said before, there's no magic formula. So we have examples of strategies that work. One is tea parties, let's say, with the parents, and but not organized by the teachers, but organized by the students, by the pupils. And that's a way of they feel important in school. They're organizing a tea party for their parents, and it's a way of bringing parents inside the school and having a social meeting. Of course, the teachers will be there, and it's much easier to talk about education in a social meeting than in an office. That's one strategy. Faisal, help me out.
It depends, as Miguel said, it depends on the context, it depends of the school, it depends of cluster of schools, it depends of lots of things. But I will say 2 or 3 things that we do in school. For instance, more formal way, we tend to negotiate, to speak with the parents association. if you have a school with a strong parent association, it will be more easier because they have a strong influence on other parents, so they can help us bring the parents in and do positive things. And other level is the class director I spoke before. If he managed to speak with the parents of their class, and then he can do some dynamics with their parents. For instance, these tea parties or activities that he invite, the students invite the parents to see these activities, and so that they can keep up the work the students are doing. Other example, if we have some parents who have enterprises, maybe we can ask these parents to make this, give some grants for some activities. This is another way of having the involvement of the parents. More selfish way, but it's a way. So you can see we have several ways to involve the family on school. But the most important thing is tell the parents that we need the parents to come to school, heard about the results, the work of his people. That's the important thing. Okay, and the other thing that was a very problem in Portugal because fathers used to go to the school just to heard the bad news, and we tried to change that. We called the fathers not just to hear the bad news, but if the student is a behavior problem, but if he do something good, and we going to call the parents to see what good things he is do, because we are working on self-esteem. We are changing all the environment, negative environment that student has for the positive environment.
Okay, thank you for the clear presentation. It opens my eyes again in some issues. For me, it was a very interesting schedule you show about exclusion, segregation, integration, and then to inclusion. And the focus is on students. But of course, when you follow this process, you also need to involve all the stakeholders who are responsible for the development of young children to grown-ups. I think what I heard in the meetings we had in the different schools, that it could be of added value to prevent early school leaving, that the connection with all those stakeholders can be enforced, so that, and for instance, the relation with local government, companies, schools, and other organizations who are dealing with grown-up of young people, that they become more a regular network to help the school, to help the children, to get them on the right track. That is something what I see. The question of leadership, school leadership. I don't know how the situation is in Portugal, but in the Netherlands, it's a lot of times that a teacher is professionalizing himself or herself to become a manager of a school. And for me, that's a little bit strange, because the new skills which you need to be, let's say, a people manager in a school, to connect with the different teachers in the school to get them in the right process, is something totally different than being a teacher. So we call it people managers. And a people manager has different skills. So it would be interesting to see what are these skills, and is everyone who tries to get this manager the right person to be that manager. And I think when the right person is on the right job, then it helps to make this progress in what you want. And I said it before, not in this webinar, but before, I would like to talk about teachers, but more about guiders of a learning process, because when you want to include these young people with all kind of different characteristics, you can't teach, but you have to be the learner of the guidance process with all kinds of different skills and competences. And I don't know if the teachers in Portugal are trained by that. In the Netherlands, you see a lot of teachers who have a lot of problems to have this big range of young people with problems, to keep them in your classroom and help them personalized. So our theme is prevention early school leaving, but these are critical factors, I think, in how we can decrease the number of early school leavers. It's not really a question, but it's thinking about with you about how can we come a step further.
Well, thank you, Theo. No, it's hard when it's not a question. You do realize that. Well, it's well, we label them teachers, but they are guiders on the learning process. We could change the name. That's the name. Of course, you are right. In very problematic classes, almost an impossible job for a teacher, and that's why we make an emphasis on the collaborative work. The solution cannot come from a classroom. The solution has to come from all the school, and when we call all the school, we call that micro-social system that includes the community, and therefore will include the local management, the companies, and all that. So this, especially in very problematic classes and regions, the school by itself won't have a solution. So it has to come from the community. And then the job of the leader will be quite hard, because you'll have to convince not only his staff, but the rest of the stakeholders. All of them have the same vision, all of them go towards, set the direction. You'll have to set the direction not only for school, but for the community. And it's possible. But
I think this could be a new project, a new Erasmus Plus project.
Setting the direction.
Building the network of stakeholders to get this process a step further.
Yeah,
we could decide that now.
That's actually a good idea.
I would add something about that, saying that the management training it's required nowadays to the heads. So from a few years from now, to be a headmaster or principal, you must have this management training, this competence. Or of course, of most of them, they are teachers. All of them, they are teachers. Some of them for 20 years, but they had to do these trainings, courses for being the principals. And about the networks, I might say that some schools construct their networks. For instance, the school we visit this morning, they have this work with one stakeholder that this firm that called Alstrom, and it's working with them. So it's about the capacity of the leader to build this net of stakeholders to put up this project, I think.
So, no more questions? Thank you all for watching. Thank you for being here. And we'll have a new webinar tomorrow morning.